Welcome. Today is a big show for us. We have someone we have quoted several times on this show. We've all read his work. By we, I mean me and my co-host, Pascal Robert. Let me bring him in right now. Coming all the way from Miami, Florida, by way of New York City. You may know him from his articles in Black Agenda Report and sometimes Huffington Post. Pascal Robert.
Peace, my brother. Peace to the chat and the viewers.
Chat's already on fire. Also, thank you. Shout out to chat moderator John Ross. Please be kind. It's going to be a hot chat tonight, John, because we have a hot topic. Let's just bring him in. Pascal, would you like to introduce our guest tonight?
The one, the only, the known left intellectual scholar, academic of Black politics, Black political history, Adolph Reed Jr.
Adolph Reed Jr.
Hey, man, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to be on. This show's been a long time in the works. We've had your son on a few times. I'm looking forward to having your son on again. When the three of us get together, it's always a pretty good time. I think the last time we were all on, we watched Boys in the Hood and just deconstructed Boys in the Hood. And that, for me, that is like the most fun when it can be us or four of us with Cedric Johnson. It's a good ass time. And recently we had on,
I'm sure it is.
Oh, recently we had on Preston Smith, which was also
great. Yeah.
That was a real good show.
Yeah.
So Pascal, I know you got some questions.
Yeah, since
Pascal's got enough questions to keep us on until after midnight. Your time, right? Not our time. Your time after midnight.
So, I just want people watching to know that for the most part, Pascal comes up with the questions, because at this point, this is all gone right now, and I don't have questions on the level that Pascal has questions.
Yeah, no, they're good and important questions. So I look forward to our discussion.
So Pascal, he called me up earlier this morning to yell at me that he had these questions and did I read them while I'm trying to fix my computer and get the show ready. Then he called me up again to yell at me if I read them. So I want y'all to know that are watching, share this shit out in your social media, because Pascal spent a lot of time trying to come up with the perfect questions for our guest today, brother Adolph Reed Jr.
Well, one of the reasons I did that is that people are so used to calling me a Reedian that would have thought I would have been just standing in a fan for everything that this out of your mouth. But
That's
instead of doing that,
the idea that there's something called a Reedian out there that people can toss around.
Somebody on the show called us. They said, called us Reedian.
You're too Reedian.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I don't know what the fuck that means, but I was like, all right.
I don't either.
All right. I was like, all right. I mean, I don't really know. All right.
Am I some kind of Vulcan or something?
We got to get a special handshake or some shit.
Yeah, right.
But Adolph, I mean, I've been reading your stuff. We've been communicating back and forth via email, and I've been reading your stuff long enough to know that you got a lot of haters. And, without a question, and contrary to what the haters would have believed, I'm going to ask you questions in here to challenge you, the core beliefs, and have you lay down the marker so they can hear how you, put up or shut up. And that's why I asked the questions that I did. So we're just going to take it from the beginning.
Okay.
All right. So, Adolph, one of the focus of your early academic work was in analyzing how, at the height of the 60s moment, the power elite in America were so able to start what we here at This Is Revolution call the the 50-year counter-revolution, meaning the period from the rise of Nixon to today and the reactionary counter to the 60s.
Right.
In one of your essays called The Black Revolution and the Reconstitution of Domination, you discuss how simply blaming the attacks of the state through COINTELPRO and other oppressions are not enough to explain why the black radicals were unable to effectively make an imprint in actual politics. You discuss how black radicalism was reconstituted into ruling class. Can you elaborate on how black radicalism post-60 was reconstituted into the prerogatives of the ruling class? And do you see the current manifestation of racial grievance politics from Black Lives Matter to reparations discourse suffering the same fate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say a couple things. I think that what happened in the wake of Black Power, right, was, in retrospect at least, a predictable phenomenon, right? And frankly, I mean, both Cedric Johnson and Preston Smith have helped me see and articulate this this dynamic in a more textured way. Because Black Power was always two things, right? It was an expressive or a performative radical politics, right? And it was a de facto ideology for consolidation of a new black political class that took shape over the 60s. I mean, really beginning, depending on where you were, like in the late or the mid to late 50s, and began to consolidate institutionally after passage of the Voting Rights Act. And it's so funny that so many people who want to talk about, the black radical tradition or whatever, as they see it now, treat the Voting Rights Act like it was just a thing that happened. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a very significant institutional development, like in American political life, but certainly in Black American political life. So what happened, basically, was this new class of, professional and managerial types who were able to respond to the expanded opportunity structures that opened after the landmark legislation of the mid-60s, which, by the way, included people like me, right, were naturally came to form communities of interest, right, in the political realm that grew more tightly bonded over time, right? And what happened was, since so much of Black Power radicalism was performative, didn't have an institutional agenda, didn't really have a practical program that was possible to organize around, it just kind of fell by the wayside, right? And it fell by the wayside. Yes, COINTELPRO had something to do with it. Yes, Ford and other foundation funding had something to do with it. But the real story was a natural transition, into a class-based ethnic politics on a model that was dominant in post-war American political life in most parts of the country, and especially like in the realm of urban politics. So in that sense, it's not. And so this is why, as much as I liked and agreed with Bruce Dixon and also Glenn Ford, that's why I don't think that the misleadership class construct is particularly helpful, because the misleadership notion presumes that the Black political class has a mission to which it's more or less committed of at advancing, the interests of Black Americans across the board. And that kind of misses the point. Like, they've got their own interests that they're advancing. And what they do, as classes typically do, is define their interests as isomorphic with the interests of the population in whose name they purport to be speaking. So I hope I didn't run away from the question.
No, but my larger question is that, do you see this manifesting itself with the current racial grievance discourse politics?
Oh, yeah. Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll say this. I mean, we got to remember, I'll just answer the question that just popped up on the screen. Yes, I am, and it doesn't matter. But but the thing to keep in mind about this transition is that it's accretive, right? I mean, it's not like point B is entirely separate from point A. So I think a way to think about it is, the new Black political class consolidated itself over the 70s, say, to be charitable, right? And the ways of thinking about Black American political life and about race and politics that we all have inherited or are accustomed to, right, over the last 30 years are rooted in the common sense that was formed out of that moment of consolidation in the 70s. So I'm saying that to say that the forms of expressive politics like Occupy and Black Lives Matter and the reparations stuff took shape in a context, in a hegemonic understanding of what Black struggle is, right? I mean, for instance, that were already dominated and defined by the Black political class. So there never was any question really as to whether those radical expressions, right, were connected with the substantive politics and program or a genuinely transformative political vision that people could try to organize around. So no, I wasn't surprised that they turned out the way they turned out. And like, you don't have to be smart in particular to have seen the absence of an organic foundation for those political expressions, which is the reason I never that I resisted calling them movements, right? Because they weren't. I mean, they were actions, right?
Okay, well, you get into my next question, and you foresee that. Another of the themes, Adolph, of your earlier work, especially in Class Notes, was the attempt to explain why there had been no serious social movement, Black or otherwise, in the post-civil rights era, and the need to return to major movements to address the contemporary dilemma. These writings were in the 90s, yet all of the so-called movements that have manifested in the 21st century, from Occupy to Black Lives Matter, I've always read you being one of the early voices on the left stating that these things won't lead anywhere or are limited in terms of their long-term effectiveness. How do you reconcile your earlier statements on the need for a return to movement politics and your almost consistent pessimism when such movements in recent history have come up?
Right. Well, I wouldn't call it pessimism. I'd call it practicality. I mean, but I think the two perspectives are organically connected because I've got a sense of what a movement would actually look like, and it would be grounded, like, institutionally among with an identifiable base of real people with names and addresses and stuff, right? And the real constituencies, and in fact, I mean, while while I try to remain open to the possibility that one of the newer things or the more recent expressions could eventually develop something or develop into something, like that. I think one of the problems that we have is premature proclamation of victory, right? Just today, I meant to check the vote tally, before I got on, but the last that I saw of the vote tally in the Amazon union vote was like over 900 no's and 295 yeses, right? So, and we knew it was going to be tough, and I just get, I find it maddening, right? How the left self-congratulation machine hypes, makes premature, or is given to making premature proclamations of victory, which make no sense. It's going to be tough. And if you proclaim the victory and then you lose the vote, then it gives rise to demoralization or whatever. And it's the same thing with Occupy, like in the rest of this stuff. I mean, it's the word isn't the deed, right? And you don't build a movement without careful, slow organizing and building the relationships with people and with organizations, right? You don't build it through, Twitter, right, or whatever. You don't proclaim it, right?
What? You're saying, how dare you say that I can't build my pretend movement with a hashtag and a series of retweets?
Well, now you can probably get some foundation grants off that. Right,
I thought that was the whole game, right? I create a hashtag. I get a bunch of retweets. I shut down a freeway or two, and then George Soros gives me a check.
Bingo. There you go. That's it. And that's how we'll get free.
That's what Puffy told me. Did you see Puffy talking? Hey, did y'all see? Because I know there's a bunch of questions and I'm fucking up the flow, but hold on 1 second. I just want to get this in. So somebody sends me this article from Puffy, and it's not even an article, it's an open letter. Puffy sent an open letter to big business. And he said, look, I'm a media company owner, because he owns a small TV station, but he owns a TV station nonetheless. Puffy has a shit ton of money. And he's like, there's a lot of Negro dollars you guys get. It's like 1.4 trillion Negro dollars. And you're not giving enough of these Negro dollars to us Negro businesses. And we need these Negro dollars, because if you're not working with us, then you are working against us. And he started quoting Desmond Tutu.
Wow.
And all this other shit.
Yep. Well, look, and I tell you what, man, like that, if you think about it just a little bit, right? Like since George Floyd's murder, who've been the big winners, right? Where this tells you, right? This should tell all of us very clearly that this is a class politics. Right, Goldman Sachs is putting up what crazy sum is it?
Pascal, what was it? $10 billion for black businesses?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Black entrepreneurs? Yeah,
for black women.
Black women.
Right.
Sorry, don't get it twisted.
And more and more of that kind of stuff is the response. And so it turns out that all of the problems that black people have can be addressed by encouraging black business development. So what does that tell you? Right. And whose story is that? Right. That's not preserving jobs in the post office. Right. That's not a $15 an hour minimum wage. Right. Right. That's not the pursuit of affordable housing. Right. It's an idolatrous class program that, and look, I've been saying this now for like 3 or 4 years now, and I understand that it's a wrong-headed tendency, but it's a natural one. but I found myself on observing each one of these preposterous apparent outrages, saying, okay, well, maybe this is the one that will get across to people who understand themselves to be on the left that this stuff is a bullshit class program for the other class. And of course it never is, right? Because that's just not the way the world works, right? There's no, I mean, St. Paul getting knocked off the horse and getting up being somebody else, right? But it becomes more and more blatant almost daily, right? And I don't know. I'll stop my rant there.
I'm sorry if I threw you off or fired you up a little bit. I saw that like right before I was doing this, and I was talking to Pascal about it actually on the way back to picking up my 2-year-old. It's frustrating because either people laugh that kind of shit off,
right,
or
right.
It becomes there's an echo chamber too in the mainstream media, right, because he is such a large figure, and then it becomes just super racialized, right? His demand for this equity becomes super racialized, and then that becomes the conversation. Someone said in the chat, George Floyd would have never been able to benefit from some of the things that have happened in his name.
So true. Right, that's so true. Yeah, so true. And I mean, even when people get ticked by the obvious hypocrisy, it's still just difficult to connect the dots, right? Because all these things are connected, right? I mean, it's like it's like not even a series of random class expressions, right? It's like Oprah and that $16,000 or $36,000 handbag, right? I mean, why am I supposed to give a shit about Oprah's handbag, right? About her
because
her
racism is real, right? Yeah,
right.
It makes racism the real end all be all. And then as we talk about, race being the end all be all, you have Kamala Harris, who is inserted for whatever issue you have, right? When this Asian violence was happening, all of a sudden Kamala Harris is the first Asian vice president. And she's talking about water rights. Right. And water being the next big fight we have. And it is. She's not the first person to say this or even talk about this. Mike Davis was writing about shit like this in the 90s. And for her to be somewhat flippant about it, like, hey, fuck oil. You're running out of good, clean drinking water. Look at Tampa.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I know. I mean, like, I'm on the board of Food and Water Watch, or Food and Water Action, the parallel group. And at our last board meeting, man, we learned, among other things, that the Chicago Merc is preparing to set up a water futures desk, right? So, I mean, that tells you where the stuff is heading. And I mean, that's why the most important thing for us now, I think, is to figure out ways to try to reinvigorate a public goods approach to government, right? Because it's hard for us to organize around any reasonable reform, right? Just because of the level of mistrust and distrust that both the right and the neoliberal left have sown in ordinary people's views of government. And it works very well for capital, but like, it doesn't do shit for us.
No, it does work very well for capital. And even if we get into the whole quote unquote reparations talk that was happening in Evanston, Illinois, where, if you live there and someone called you the N-word and didn't give you a house between 1919 and 54, then maybe you can get 25,000. Say again?
Not until 1969, actually.
Yes, it was,
Right, because Ken Warren and I both lived in Evanston, so I went to check to see
if you can get some money?
See if we can get some money.
But that whole thing is, You didn't make the cutoff. You was mad.
No.
You was like, well, they called me a nigga 5 times before I left. All right,
oh man. Well, you can ask you can ask my son about this one, but I had an altercation with a bank guard in Evanston, who was following me around a bank when I was trying to write out a deposit slip, and we had sharp words. I'll put it to you like that.
Pascal, you wanna? I know. I see you itching.
No, man. I like the back and forth. Next question. Adolph, one thing that you
yes, sir.
One thing that you always made clear, and that I've often repeated, black politics is a class politics. What is your definition of black politics, and explain why you believe black politics is a class politics, and whether or not that has always been the case?
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was struck by that question too. It's another very good one. Well, and in this area too, like my thinking has been sharpened by Cedric Johnson and Preston Smith on this point. That what took shape in the post-war decades was the articulation of a black ethnic politics, basically. I mean, that's what political incorporation was, right, basically. And it was on balance, right, better than what preceded it, which was sort of a clientage arrangement. And black political elites got incorporated into local governing coalitions, at first at least, on an ethnic group basis. Bringing Preston in, from the 30s to well into the 50s, there were two distinct, more or less distinguishable, because they weren't always distinct in the moment, tendencies in politics among Black Americans, right? One is a tendency that he called racial democracy, which is liberal pluralism, basically, right? I mean, it's anti-disparitarianism, which is a model of a just society in which Black people would approximate their percentage in the overall population in all the social and economic hierarchies, or on all the levels of social and economic hierarchy from the top to the bottom. So as Benjamin Wright, the brother of Nathan Wright, the Black Power preacher, and Benjamin Wright was an executive at Clairol, said that the just society would be one in which Black people were 10% of the corporate CEOs and the corporate boards, and 10% of the unemployed, and everything in between. That's the ideal of racial democracy, and that's what the pursuit of parity gets you, right? The other tendency that came out of the 30s and the CIO and the growth of a left politics, more broadly left politics around the New Deal, is a commitment to social democracy, right? To a social democratic agenda, which was a tendency within Black politics that asserted that the only way that Black people, or the best and the safest way to win benefits for Black people, is to win them for the society as a whole. And to the extent that Black Americans were disproportionately among the working class, winning benefits on a class basis for working people would also disproportionately redound to the benefit of Black people, right? So there's a logical tension between these two imperatives that sometimes erupted, sometimes didn't. But the long and the short of it is that by the mid 60s, and what happened during the Cold War and Red Scare and I mean McCarthyism and that stuff was definitely a contributing factor. But what happened was that the racial democratic tendency became dominant, right? And that's what's been driving in our understanding of what counts as Black politics ever since then. So, for instance, as Judith Stein said in a very powerful essay in 1974 and 5, that the way we came to understand black politics was that if a group of Black workers organized to form a union, speaking of Bessemer, then that didn't count as Black politics. But if they fought against racism within the union they were in, then that did count as Black politics. So in that sense, the class tensions have always been there in Black American politics, insofar as they mapped onto the class tensions in the society at large. And I mean, it's interesting to keep in mind in this regard too, that the idea of a distinctively Black politics or a Black political voice or whatever took shape, and especially the notion of Black leader, right, took shape at precisely the moment when Black people, the vast majority of whom lived in the South, were disfranchised and were basically stripped of civic voice, right, as ordinary people, right? And when, as Michael R. West has argued, the notion of race relations took shape, in part to make Black people invisible as individual citizens, and to make them condensable, right, like into the persona of individuals who were identified as responsible voices for the Negro or I mean Negro leaders or whatever. But certainly since by the end of the Carter administration, Black political elites had become increasingly less able to deliver even symbolic benefits to rank and file Black people. And that's when we begin to see like the big question about what the Negro is going to get from a presidential administration, with stuff like who is going to get what appointments, and which Black people are going to go to the federal judiciary or to the cabinet, because they couldn't win anything else, and then eventually didn't think about trying to win anything else that would do good for Black people at large. But to the point that by 2016, right, James Clyburn, John Lewis, and Cedric Richmond, who at that point was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, denounced Bernie Sanders for wanting to pursue a redistributive agenda that would disproportionately benefit Black people. So,
okay, we're gonna get to that. Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you agree that there is a black political class in America? Do you agree that there is a Black political class in America? And if so, how do you define it? What are the social mechanisms that give it life? And who is such class truly beholden to? How does such a class constrain the political aspirations of Black America, if at all? And is this only a post-civil rights phenomenon?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. I think to all that, right? I mean, you could have called, what Malcolm called the Big Six, right? I mean, you could have called them, something like a Black political class, right? And it was easier to identify them because they were leaders of organizations, right, and had constituencies. Since the VRA, I mean, I think there's no question but that there's a Black political class, right? I mean, they congeal around views of the world, sense of justice, and their material aspirations, and so forth. I mean, so so they come together around common interests, and they are as much a class for themselves as they are a class in themselves. And I think that's become increasingly the case since the mid 70s, right? To whom are they beholden? See, I got a little. I'd make a modification to that question, because they're ultimately beholden to themselves and their own interests, and insofar as there's an implicit question in the question as to whether they are beholden to a Black constituency or a Black community. They think they are, of course, but what they take to be the Black community is a world of contractors and donors and their class peers, right? That's how it is that the issues that become understood to be the Black agenda never have anything to do with making working class people's lives better in a concrete way, right? I mean, that's kind of the definitive way of saying that they're a class in and for themselves. Now, I think there was another piece of that, the last piece of it. Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's become that's who won the civil rights movement, basically. I mean, don't get me wrong, like the rest of us got a bunch out of it too. And I mean, more broadly speaking, those of us who were in a position to take advantage of the new opportunity structures are the ultimate constituency for this Black political class, right? But it just doesn't dig any deeper than us, because you remember that what there is like, in their view of Black America, in their practical view of Black America, these political elites see a bifurcated population, right? There's like the Huxtables, for people who are old enough to remember Bill Cosby before his habits came out on it, and the underclass, right? And like their job is to go straighten up the underclass, both through moral suasion and the Dutch uncle speech, and I mean, like my son, I mean, I agree that Popeye's chicken in the morning can be really good, especially taking into account what you did the night before. It could be even better. But,
I'd also like to add that there is an all-you-can-eat Popeyes in Lafayette, Louisiana, and it is the only one.
Oh my
it's
God!
A magical place, right?
It's gotta be. Yeah. Well, like when I get back down there, I just might have to drive over to Lafayette.
On tour, it's a must. I actually lived for not too long. I worked in the Gulf of Mexico for a little bit, and so I was.
Oh wow, okay.
That was the closest place.
On a rig or something?
Yes, sir. Yes,
wow.
sir. I cooked on oil rigs.
Oh, did you? Wow.
Yeah.
So were you in a union or?
Them motherfuckers didn't have no union. They didn't unionize. That's where I learned. I'll be totally honest. My dad's worked union jobs the majority of his adult life, and going to the Gulf of Mexico is really where I learned kind of the power of unions and what happens when you work in an environment that is strictly non-union. And I don't think people understand things like Bessemer, Alabama. Like there's been a kind of a fight to keep unions out of big time industries in the South. So here I am working in literally the engine of Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast is oil, right? And it's not just non-union. It's we are going to fly in Filipino slave labor. And that was the first time I saw that in my life. Was them flying in, and I didn't understand until I actually some shit happened between me and the company, and I ended up staying in the Filipino barracks, which was a double wide trailer that these dudes were getting their paycheck just decimated for these like expenses, if you will, and they're stuck in the States because they have to work out a contract. So No, the
Right.
Gulf is not a union environment. It's not as dangerous as it once was, but there
Right.
were a few deaths while I was out there actually, and then I left right before
Yeah,
the
sure.
spill.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, well,
moving on with the question.
like I said, I'm gonna make that trip. I'm gonna make that trip to Lafayette.
Lafayette. Hey,
Anyway.
it's right there. It's right there by the Cajun Dome.
Oh, okay, very good. Pardon me, Pascal.
All right,
Excuse me.
All right, hey, we gotta get to these questions, Adolph, man. No problem. I understand, brother. I understand. Listen, I know you've written extensively about your critiques of the limitations of the Black Power movement. We also know that many of our comrades on the Black left who consider themselves revolutionary nationalists pride themselves on being acolytes of that particular era of politics. Explain to us what you believe is problematic about overzealous adherence to Black Power era nostalgia, and how do you deal with the detractors who will claim that your posture is quote unquote not revolutionary or purely integrationist? And you and I both know that a lot of those Negroes will say that.
Right. Oh yeah, no, I know. Well, I mean, I'm a product of that era and that movement myself, right? So, I'm only going to get bent out of shape about what anybody else thinks. But, so I tell you what, I mean, like the essay that you mentioned, the book chapter that you mentioned at the very beginning, the Black Revolution, was originally a paper that I did for a conference that I organized when I was teaching at Howard, and Preston Smith actually worked on the conference too. That was held in the fall of 1976, right? And it was a conference, most of the papers of which, or many of the papers of which, were published a few years later in an anthology called Race, Politics, and Culture, Critical Essays on the Radicalism of the 60s. Oh, okay. Well, the point of that conference was to pull people together to discuss, that's it. Wow. Yeah, it looks good. To discuss why we had lost and what happened, right? Now that's 1975, we were organizing this, and there were enough people to fill up like a day and a half, I think, conference to talk about how the movements of the 60s had lost and why, okay? Black Power by 1975 had pretty clearly lost, or Black Power radicalism. The two or three tendencies that came out of it, which Sedgwick Johnson's first book is about, Pan-Africanism, what's cultural nationalism, and a kind of funny ass mechanistic Marxism, right? Were all evasions of the fact that the petty bourgeois politicians had won by the early 1970s, right? And it makes sense that they won, right? They had the resources. We didn't. We had an ideology, one that wasn't connected with people's needs on a daily basis, right? And once these Black people started to get elected to office, ordinary people, especially ordinary middle-class people, could get stuff out of government, right? And these ideological tendencies were expressions of the inability of Black Power as a criticism to take account of what had been happening within Black politics, right? Robert L. Allen's book, Black Awakening in Capitalist America, came out in 1969, and it was a trenchant critique of Black Power. What I didn't figure out until a number of years later was that, I knew his conclusion was unsatisfying, but I didn't figure out until a number of years later that the problem that all of us had during the late 60s and early 70s about coming to terms with what would become clear as the class character of what was becoming Black Power, was that we persisted in holding the Black community as the norm, right? As a standard for evaluation of Black political behavior. Well, there is no community like in that sense, right? There's not a coherent voice, right? And I mean, the community was kind of like the masses, right? It's by definition mute. So like anybody could jump up and grab the microphone and say, I'm speaking for the community. And I can't tell you how many versions, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too. I mean, how many versions of the person who would come and say, I'm speaking for the peoples in the community because the peoples in the community is sick and tired. We've been waiting, so forth and so on. And the next thing you know, that person's got an anti-poverty grant, right? So Black Power. So there's nothing to be nostalgic about. Well, see, I don't think there's a lot. I mean, I'm kind of like Mom's Mabley about this. She once said the only thing good about the good old days is that they're gone. And I mean, we have a history, right? And we learn from that history. Black people get nostalgic for the old days. It always strikes me as kind of odd, frankly. But and look, it's unavoidable, right? I mean, I get wistful about being able to taste a honeydew melon, which I haven't been able to do for 30 years, right, or 40 years at this point, because they're all made out of wax, basically. But Black Power didn't realize or didn't fail to realize its promise. It was naive after the fact. So I'll say this, mea culpa as a self-criticism too, to have imagined that it had that promise in the first place, right? I mean, let me say this too. It's a little bit of a red herring, but not much. I mean, when I first read, not the first time, but the second time when I was a little older, read Fanon, the Wretched of the Earth, it really struck me that what was then called or translated as the Pitfalls of National Consciousness chapter was one that nobody ever talked about, but it was the only one that had direct bearing on what was happening with racial transition in American politics at that point. But while everybody was talking about, violent or the purgative character, violence, or going on about black skin, white masks, if there was anything to be gotten from Fanon, it's the thing that people didn't get from it, right? Which is, I mean, you can, get a new flag, you can get a new picture on the currency, but if the political economic relations haven't changed, then the national bourgeoisie is a bourgeoisie right before it's national, right? And the Black political elite is part of the political elite more, and I guess I would say like the political elite is the noun and Black is the adjective, right?
I can dig it. We move forward.
Okay.
If we contend that race is a social construct and that Black politics often fails because it's a class politics, why shouldn't similar arguments be made about labor politics or feminist politics or any other politics? Why are the fractures or frictions in Black politics any different than those that arise in any other politics, making it any less legitimate?
Well, I mean, I don't know about if legitimacy is a standard, right? Because Black politics is legitimate to the PMC and the people who benefit from it, right? But I mean, I would think the same, or there's a similar dynamic in the women's movement, right? Because it has become now the voice of PMC women, right? Largely. Whose whose main objective is to win office and rise in the corporate world. Labor politics is kind of different because it's a class politics by definition. In the labor movement, part of the struggle is over how
Deep State got him.
So, I mean, right.
I'm right here.
So that's it, I would say.
Okay. Moving on.
There's just a weird message on the screen. I couldn't.
Oh, sorry about that. There's some things.
Yeah, no, it's not you, but it's gone. But so.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, as one who has written about the left politics, how the left politics was vanquished by the ruling class in America by sometimes reconstituting leftism into ruling class prerogatives, why were you or have you been particularly supportive of Bernie Sanders' Democratic Party entryism as opposed to viewing it as an ultimate vehicle for ruling class absorption? As much as certain Bernie supporters fetishize the New Deal, even according to FDR, was an effort to save capitalism. As a lifelong leftist and Marxist like yourself, why does Bernie Sanders' Keynesianism masked as socialist not portend to do order?
Well, yeah, that's a good question too. I mean, look, politics is like contextual, right? And what's appropriate in one moment may not be appropriate in another moment. And we've also got to be pragmatic, right? We got to walk before we can run, and crawl before we can walk. Now I'm on record as not being as enthusiastic at all about the idea of being able to elect our way right into social transformation. And I was skeptical about Sanders at first in 2015 too, for this reason. But then I began to see that what Bernie partly was doing was trying to use the visibility of the presidential primary to plant seeds out there to prompt other longer term organizing. I thought he was pretty successful in 2016, except actually not very many people took up the challenge. He was more successful in 2020, but like then the combination of the pandemic and the summer of the Great Awakening kind of undercut a lot of that activity. But I mean, the situation in the U.S. is like, I don't know, I spent 30 years practically preaching this gospel of the need, to do face-to-face organizing in trade unions and communities and elsewhere to build independent politics. And one of the things that's happened, and there are a number of reasons for it, I know, but over the last few decades, is that people have lost taste for that kind of organizing. And I thought the Sanders campaigns would at least help us out on that front. And look, like where we were working in South Carolina, we got 18,000 people, mainly Black and working class, to sign pledges indicating that they didn't want to vote, or they preferred not to vote for any candidate who didn't support Medicare for all. And that's the kind of, and we were making connections around the state, at the community center level. And that's the kind of work that it should be, and definitely would have been possible to build on after Sanders dropped out. And I mean, I was going back and forth with somebody. I think it was Brianna Joy Gray about this, that that the inclination to parse what Bernie Sanders might have done differently is, in my view, completely wrongheaded, because he was as successful as he could have been. The inclination to ask that question, I think, rests on a premise that he might have been able to win the nomination if he had done something differently, which I never thought for a second. And nobody who, in my view, took politics seriously thought that he could win the nomination, except, for maybe a few hours after, the Nevada caucus. But even after that, people came to their senses pretty quickly. So, and look, I mean, sometimes, and Trotskyists are the absolute worst about this, of course, but I think a lot of leftists treat the Democratic Party like it's the great Satan, right? I mean, most of the votes that I've cast in my life have been for Democrats, right? And I think that's probably true of most of us, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that the Democrats stand for what you want, right? But there are all kinds of instrumental reasons, right, that it could make sense to vote for them. And frankly, in 2020, just like in 2016, not being Donald Trump was a good enough reason, right? And there are others like that too. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't see any conflict, right? I mean, I think we need the movement, and whatever ways we can find to jumpstart trying to organize it.
So do you think there is a progressive movement post-Sanders?
No. No. I mean, I think the objective is to build on the little bit of space that the space that Sanders created for us. See, because I don't think that it's all, and maybe this is optimistic, but I don't think that it's all a matter of, or that it's all been wiped out by the pandemic. I mean, people have the same problems now that they had then, even worse, right? Especially around healthcare stuff. So I think as soon as it's possible to get out there again, we need to start trying to rebuild the networks that had started to come together during the campaign. But no, I mean, there's no movement. I mean, if there would be a movement, like we would have won something by now, right?
It's interesting you say that.
All right.
I asked a similar question to Mike Davis. Oh, I just realized we're at an hour.
Oh, okay.
Do you have some more time for us? Hold on with your black ass questions.
Yeah.
Do you have some more time, Dr. Reed?
Yep, I have time.
Because usually what we do is we cut the show at an hour and then we go to our bonus patron only segment.
Ah, okay. Well, I mean, whatever you want to do.
Is that cool? Would you be willing to come into the? It's just I send you another link to the patron only side. That's all.
Oh, okay.
It's the same simple stuff. Can we tease people? Can we tease people out with the question though? Can we tease them out with the question, Pascal?
Yeah.
We got to tease them. You have to give them wanting more. You can't give them all 75 of the questions in 1 hour. So tease them out with the question. Tease them out with the question real quick. Tease them out.
All right. Let me tease them out with a question.
Tease them out.
All right.
Okay.
Dr. Reed, this is going to be a heavy one here. How do you deal with the criticisms from black leftists who state that the white left is too racist and racially chauvinistic to work with and traditionally has always sided with the ruling class interests against black folk when things got hot? I literally heard that statement by some black left folk recently. These folk would argue that only a revolutionary black left socialist vision can address the needs of black people. What is your position on such thinking?
Don't answer that. We're going to save it for the bonus half.
Oh, okay. All right.
We got to tease it out. Thank you guys for watching.
All right.
Professor Reed, thank you for joining us for this free half. Now we're going to go into the bonus half. So give us like about
right,
10, 15 minutes.
All right,
I'll email you.
I need to log out.
Yeah, I'm going to email
Right?
you the link. Yep. I'll email you.
Okay. All right, very good.
So thank you so much.
Thanks, Adolph.
So, hey, Pascal still got more fiery questions. He's not even halfway done. That's how many questions he wrote. It looked like a goddamn essay when he sent it to me. And he said, "Did you read the questions?" I was like, "No, because I don't have all day to read your 1,000-word essay." So my mom says she needs a link. No, Mama, you don't need a link because you've been talking mess about me the whole time in the chat. That's what you get for talking mess. Be a patron. I said it. I asked Mama to be a patron. No, I'll give you a link. So calm the hell down. Mama. By the way, did you know my mom is the only person that I call by her like mom or dad? I call my dad by his first name.
You call your mom by her first name too?
Well, I refer to her as Pamela Davis as my mom, but when I talk to her, that is my mom, like Mama. But my dad is Lionel. Okay. When I talk to my dad, it's Lionel. If I called him dad, he'd be like, "What do you want?" He would be weirded out.
I hope the viewers like the show, and I want to say point blank, one of the reasons why I did this today is because I wanted, unlike some of the white left podcasts who have Adolph Reed and never talk to him about his specialty, which is black politics, I wanted to actually talk to the man about what his specialty is instead of using him to justify what their paranoias are about black politics.
So yeah, Pascal's been fired up for a minute, and I'm excited. I'm equally as excited. This is a lot of fun. So if you guys are patrons, get ready. Give me a couple minutes to put the link up for you guys. If you're not a patron, let me put it up on the screen. Become a patron. It's easy. It's affordable. We could use the support. If you'd like to help the show grow, you want Pascal to get better lighting, maybe an Ethernet cable so we don't have these connection issues. We'd appreciate that. My mom says, "You're so passionate." Look at that. Look at that. Mom says, "You are so passionate." He is. He is very passionate. And he's about to let these motherfuckers have it. Yeah, Bitter Lake is the band. It started as the band. Don't ask too many questions, goddamn it.
No, send Adolph the link, man. We don't want to lose him.
All right. So you know what? We are out. Get ready. So if you're a patron, the link to Patreon is coming up, and we'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Remember Chuck Willery in 2 and 2. All right. Peace.